The first thing the cowboy noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes with a soft sunset, but the heavy, frozen quiet that settles over land forgotten by the world. Snow lay unbroken across the plain, stretching as far as the eye could see, pale and endless. Like the earth itself had stopped breathing. Its horse slowed on its own, hooves crunching softly as if it sensed something waiting ahead. The cowboy had crossed many miles of rough country, owned more land than most men in 3 counties, and faced storms, droughts, and gunfire without flinching. Yet something about that silence made his grip tighten on the reins. He was known as a wealthy cowboy, though he rarely used that word himself. To others, wealth meant his broad acres of grazing land, his strong cattle herds, and the way bankers tipped their hats when he walked into town. To him, it meant long days, harder nights, and a life spent mostly alone beneath wide American skies. His coat was thick and worn, his gloves scarred from years of work, and his hat sat low, shading eyes that had seen both fortune and loss. He was not a man easily surprised, and he did not believe in signs or fate. But as his gaze settled on the shape ahead, even he could not deny a strange pull in his chest. The cabin stood crooked against the snow, old logs dark with age and weather. Its roof sagged under years of wind and ice, patched with whatever wood could be found. One corner leaned as if the building itself was tired of standing. It was the kind of place most folks rode past without a second glance, assuming it abandoned or cursed by time. Yet there it was, stubborn and still, refusing to disappear. The cowboy frowned. He knew this land well. No homestead had been marked here on any map, and no neighbors lived for miles. He guided his horse closer, scanning the ground. There were tracks. Fresh ones, small boots. Not made for long journeys, pressed into the snow near the door. Someone lived here. That alone was enough to make him uneasy. Winters in this part of the country were unforgiving. Even strong men struggled to survive them with full barns and warm houses. Whoever stayed in this cabin was either desperate or determined beyond reason. Then he saw her. She stood a short distance from the cabin, wrapped in a thin, faded shawl that did little to guard against the cold. Her dress hung loose, worn at the hem, the color dulled by years of washing and hard use. Dark hair was pulled back simply, not for beauty, but for survival. She did not run when she saw him. She did not wave or call out. She just stood there, hands folded in front of her, watching the stranger on horseback, as though she'd been expecting him, or perhaps had long stopped expecting anyone at all. The cowboy felt something shift inside him. He had met many women in his life, in busy towns and crowded halls, dressed in fine cloth and bright smiles. None had ever looked at him the way this woman did. Her eyes held caution, yes, but also a quiet strength, the kind forged by hardship. She looked like someone who had learned to endure without complaint. He dismounted slowly, careful not to startle her. The cold bit through his coat as soon as his boots touched the ground. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of respect more than greeting. Close he could see how young she was, though life had aged her beyond her years. Her cheeks were pale from the cold, and her hands were red and cracked, proof of labor that never rested. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the cabin behind her. "Living," she said simply. The word hung between them, heavier than any long explanation. Living. Not surviving. Not waiting. Living. The cowboy glanced at the cabin again. He imagined the nights she must spend inside, the wind howling through gaps in the logs, the cold creeping in, no matter how close she sat to the fire. He thought of his own house, solid and warm, with more rooms than he ever used. He felt a strange discomfort settle in his chest, one he could not easily name. He asked how long she had been there. She said a few years. He asked if anyone helped her. She shook her head. He asked if she had family nearby. Her silence answered for her. Each response painted a clearer picture, and none of it sat well with him. This land was harsh, but it was also rich, and he had taken plenty from it. Seeing someone endure so much with so little stirred something he had kept buried beneath routine and responsibility. She did not ask him for anything. That was what struck him most. No plea, no hopeful glance toward his horse or his well-fed frame. She spoke only when spoken to, and when she did, there was pride in her voice, quiet but firm. The cowboy realized then that whatever had brought her here, she was not the kind of woman who expected rescue. Snow began to fall lightly, the sky dimming as clouds rolled in. He knew he should leave soon if he wanted to reach shelter before dark. Storms moved fast across these plains, and even experienced riders could be caught off guard. Yet his feet felt rooted to the ground. He had ridden past suffering before. Ranch hands down on their luck, families forced to move on, men broken by bad seasons. He usually helped when he could, but this felt different. This was not a passing glance on a dusty road. This was a moment asking for more than a coin or a kind word. He studied her cabin more closely now. The door barely fit its frame. Smoke leaked from cracks instead of the chimney. The roof would not hold another heavy snow. One hard winter could bring it all down. The thought unsettled him. He wondered how many nights she had gone to sleep listening to the walls creak, wondering if morning would come without disaster. She noticed his gaze and straightened slightly as if to defend the place. "It's not much," she said, "but it's mine." That sentence struck deeper than she could know. The cowboy had built his fortune on land, on ownership, on the idea that what was his could never be taken if he worked hard enough. Yet here was a woman with almost nothing, clinging fiercely to what little she had carved out for herself. There was dignity in that, and courage too. He asked her name. She gave it, simple and uncommon, shaped by old roots. It sounded like it belonged to this land, like it had grown from the soil itself. He repeated it once, quietly committing it to memory. She looked surprised, as though unused to anyone caring enough to remember. The wind picked up, sharper now. His horse shifted, uneasy. Time pressed in on him, urging him to make a choice. He could leave, ride back to the comfort he knew, and forget this place by spring. Or he could do something else, something that might change not only her life, but his own. He reached into his coat, not for money, but for a folded paper. Deeds, contracts, promises written in ink. His world ran on documents like these. He looked at the paper, then at her, standing in the snow with nothing but stubborn hope holding her upright. For the first time in years, he felt unsure of himself. "I didn't expect to find anyone out here," he said slowly, "especially not someone like you." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't expect anyone to stop." The truth of that hung heavy in the cold air. The cowboy knew that whatever he decided in the next few moments would follow him for the rest of his life. This was not a chance meeting. It was a crossroad. He folded the paper back into his coat, his jaw set, eyes still on the woman and the fragile cabin behind her. Snow continued to fall, quiet and steady, covering the ground as if trying to erase all signs of struggle. He took a step forward, and in that instant, before a single word more was spoken, before any promise was made or broken, the future shifted. Waiting to see what a wealthy cowboy would do when faced with a truth no amount of money could ignore. He stopped just a few steps away from her, close enough to see the faint tremble in her hands. Whether it came from the cold or something deeper, he could not tell. He did not reach out. Now he had learned long ago that some distances mattered. Instead, he looked past her toward the cabin again, noticing things he had missed at first glance. A broken shutter hung by one hinge. A stack of firewood leaned against the wall, uneven and half buried in snow. Someone had tried to make order here, despite the odds. "You're alone out here," he said, not as a question. She nodded once. "Most days." That word again. Most. It suggested there were days that were different, days marked by memories or visitors that no longer came. He wanted to ask more, but he sensed that questions pushed too hard would close her off. So he waited. Silence, he was learning, could be a kind of kindness. The wind carried the smell of smoke from the cabin, thin and sharp. Whatever fire she kept inside was small, carefully fed. I thought of the wood piled at his ranch, enough to last several winters without worry. He felt the old weight of responsibility settle on him, the same weight he carried when a hired hand was injured or cattle were lost to illness. This was different, though. This was not business. This was a human life balanced on the edge of survival. "How did you end up here?" he asked finally. She looked past him, out across the open land, as if the answer was written somewhere in the distance. "It was the only place left," she said. "The only one no one wanted." He understood that too well. Land like this was unforgiving. No river nearby, soil too thin for crops, winters that lasted too long. People chased opportunity elsewhere, leaving behind only the stubborn and the forgotten. Still, someone had once built this cabin with hope. Someone had believed a life could grow here. He asked if the cabin had been hers from the start. She shook her head. It was already standing, falling apart even then. I fixed what I could. With no help, she met his eyes again. I learned that simple statement told him more than any long story could. Learning here meant failing, getting back up and trying again with numb fingers and empty pockets. It meant facing nights when fear pressed in as hard as the cold. He wondered what kind of past shaped a person into someone capable of that. Snow thickened around them, settling on his shoulders and the brim of his hat. He knew better than to linger, yet something held him there. Perhaps it was the thought that if he rode away now, this place would fade into memory, and whatever happened here would happen without witness. I'm headed back before dark, he said. Storm's coming. She nodded again, as if storms were an ordinary guest. They always do. He hesitated, then asked if she had enough food. Her pause was brief, but he caught it. Enough, she said. He had heard that word spoken by men too proud to admit hunger. Enough often meant barely. He did not press her. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He held it out without comment. She looked at it, then at him, suspicion flickering across her face. I can't pay you. I'm not asking, he replied. Another pause, then she took it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. Her hand was colder than the winter air. That small contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. He stepped back, unsettled by his own reaction. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded, mounted his horse, and turned away. The decision to leave felt heavier than he expected. As he rode off, he glanced back once. She stood where he had left her, a small figure against the vastness, watching until distance blurred her into the falling snow. The ride back was long and restless. The land he knew so well felt changed, as if something beneath it had shifted. His thoughts returned again and again to the cabin, to the way it leaned into the wind, and to the woman who refused to leave it. He told himself he had done enough. He told himself that every man could not save everyone. Still, the image followed him all the way home. That night, his house felt too quiet. The fire roared in the hearth, casting warm light on thick walls and polished wood. Supper waited on the table, prepared by hands that worked for him. He ate without appetite, his mind elsewhere. Outside, the storm arrived in full force, wind howling like something alive. He imagined that sound battering the cabin, rattling its weak bones. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought uneasy dreams. He saw the cabin swallowed by snow, its door buried, smoke gone. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, the storm still raging. By morning, the snow lay deep across the land. Ranch hands moved slowly, clearing paths and tending animals. The cowboy watched from his porch, his decision forming even as he pretended to consider routine matters. He told himself he would ride out once the weather eased, just to check, just to be sure. 2 days passed before the skies cleared enough for travel. The cold lingered, sharp and biting. He saddled his horse without explanation and rode out alone. Each mile felt longer than before. When the cabin finally came into view, his chest tightened. It still stood. Relief washed through him, followed quickly by something else. Unease. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, but the door hung open, banging softly in the wind. He dismounted and approached, calling out. No answer. Inside, the cabin was colder than he expected. The fire had gone out. A single chair sat near the hearth, a thin blanket folded neatly on it. The place was clean in a sparse way, every item chosen with care. On a small table lay a piece of bread, half-eaten. No sign of struggle, no sign of her. He stepped back outside, scanning the snow. Tracks led away from the cabin, heading toward the distant trees. They were hurried, uneven. Something had driven her out into the cold. His jaw tightened. This was no longer a chance encounter. Whatever forces had shaped her life had not finished with her yet. He followed the tracks a short distance before stopping. The snow was too deep, the trail already fading. He would need help, and time mattered. As he turned back toward his horse, he noticed something else near the cabin door. Mark carved into the wood, old but recently deepened. A symbol he did not recognize, sharp and deliberate. It was not decoration. It was a warning or a claim. The mystery deepened, pulling him further in. He realized then that the woman's solitude was not just a choice or misfortune. There were reasons she lived so far from others, reasons she did not speak of her past. He mounted his horse again, determination replacing doubt. Whatever this was, he was now part of it. He would find her, and he would uncover the truth behind that lonely cabin and the life clinging to it. But as he rode back toward his ranch, one thought stayed with him, heavy and unshakable. Some doors once opened could never be closed again. The ride back to the ranch felt heavier than the storm clouds he had just left behind. The tracks in the snow, the open door, the cold hearth, and that strange mark carved into the wood all pressed against his thoughts. He had seen symbols before, mostly carved by restless hands or bored men passing time. This one was different. It had been cut with purpose, deep and sharp, as if someone wanted it to last. Someone wanted it seen. By the time he reached his land, the sun was already dipping low. The ranch came into view, wide fences stretching across the horizon, cattle huddled together against the cold. To anyone else, it would look like security, power, and success. To him that evening, it felt like distance. Distance from a problem he could no longer ignore. He dismounted and handed his horse to one of the hands, then went inside without his usual nods or small talk. A few men noticed. They always did when something was off with him. He was steady by nature, predictable. That steadiness had built his reputation. Tonight it was cracked. He poured himself coffee, though he barely tasted it, and stared at the wall where old maps hung. One map showed the outer edges of his land, another marked trails, water sources, and forgotten claims. His eyes traced the area where the cabin stood. No official markings, no names, just empty space. That, too, was suspicious. He called for one of his most trusted ranch hands, a man who had worked the land nearly as long as he had owned it. The man listened as the cowboy spoke, his face tightening when the description of the cabin and the carved mark came up. "I've seen something like that before," the hand said slowly. "Not often. Folks used to mark land that way when they didn't want attention or when they were hiding something." "Hiding from who?" the cowboy asked. The hand shrugged. "Depends. Creditors. The law. Other folks with claims that answer opened more questions than it closed." The cowboy dismissed him with a nod and sat alone again. If she was hiding, it meant danger followed her. If danger followed her, then leaving her alone was not kindness. It was abandonment. The next morning, he rode into town. The place buzzed with its usual low noise, wagons creaking, voices overlapping, boots scraping against wooden boards. He tied his horse and stepped inside the general store first, listening more than talking. News traveled fast in towns like this, especially news wrapped in rumor. A few men spoke of strangers seen on the outer roads. Others mentioned land disputes, old claims being dusted off by people who smelled profit. No one spoke directly of a woman in a cabin, but the absence itself felt telling, as if her name had been spoken before and then quietly buried. He moved on to the sheriff's office, careful with his words. Asked about missing persons, travelers, trouble near the edge of the county. Sheriff leaned back, expression guarded. "Nothing official," he said, "but there's been talk. Folks passing through, asking questions about land that isn't for sale, looking for someone who doesn't want to be found." The cowboy thanked him and left, unease settling deeper. By the time he mounted his horse again, he knew this was no simple case of hardship. There were people searching, and where there were searches there was pressure. That afternoon, far from town and closer to the trees beyond the cabin, the woman moved carefully through the snow. Her breath came in short bursts, her legs aching with every step. She had not planned to leave that morning. The storm had forced her hand, but the visitors had sealed her choice. They had come at dawn, 2 men on horses she did not recognize. She had seen them from the window, the way they circled before stopping, the way they studied the cabin like it was a prize already claimed. She did not wait to hear their words. Some questions were better left unanswered. She took only what she could carry. The bread, the blanket, a small bundle of belongings that held more memory than value. She followed an old path she had used before, one few people noticed, winding toward thicker trees and uneven ground. It was slower, but it hid her tracks. As she walked, her thoughts returned to the cowboy, to his steady voice, his careful distance, the way he had looked at the cabin like it mattered. She had not expected kindness from a man like him. Wealth often dulled people, made them blind to anything outside their comfort. He had seen her, really seen her, and that frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. She did not want him tangled in this. Whatever trouble followed her had teeth. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Years ago, promises had been made, papers signed, trust given. When those promises broke, she was the one left paying the price. She reached the edge of the trees and stopped to rest, pressing her back against a trunk. The cold seeped through her clothes, but she welcomed the pain. It kept her alert. She could not afford mistakes now. Back at the ranch, the cowboy prepared to ride out again, this time with purpose. He packed supplies, not knowing how long he might be gone. He told no one exactly where he was headed. Too many ears listened when land and secrets mixed. He followed the trail to the cabin, heart sinking when he saw the deeper tracks around it. Horses this time, men. He dismounted, examining the ground closely. Tracks led in different directions, confused by the storm, but he saw enough to confirm his fear. She had been forced out. Anger flared, sharp and unexpected. Not the loud kind, but the kind that settled deep and steady. The kind that pushed a man forward without hesitation. He followed what remained of her trail toward the trees, dismounting when the path grew too rough. Hours passed as he searched, calling out only once, quietly, hoping she would recognize his voice. There was no answer. Night crept in, shadows stretching long and cold. He was forced to turn back, the risk of getting lost too great. As he rode home under a darkening sky, one truth became clear. This land he thought he controlled still held stories he did not know, claims older than fences, conflicts buried beneath snow and silence. Elsewhere, the men who had come to the cabin regrouped near the main road. They spoke in low voices, irritation sharp in their tones. They had expected an easy task. A lone woman, an empty claim, a matter of time. Instead, she had slipped through their hands again. She won't last long out there, one said. She always does, the other replied. And now someone else is paying attention. That someone else they both knew was a problem. The cowboy returned to his ranch long after dark, his resolve set. He could no longer pretend this was not his concern. Wealth had given him comfort, but it had also given him reach, and reach came with responsibility. As he stared out across his land, toward the unseen cabin and the woods beyond, he understood that the conflict had only begun. The woman's past was catching up to her, and by stepping into her path, he had placed himself squarely in its way. The night swallowed the plains, quiet and watchful, as forces long hidden began to move. Morning came slow and pale, light creeping over the plains like it was unsure it belonged there. The cowboy had barely slept. His thoughts moved in circles, returning again and again to the empty cabin. The tracks and the knowledge that others were now involved. He drank his coffee standing, staring out at land that had once felt settled and now felt uncertain. Somewhere beyond his fences, a woman was moving through cold and danger alone. He could not accept that. He gathered a small group of men he trusted, not with explanations, but with clear instructions. They would check out her fences, watch the roads, and listen. He would ride again toward the trees, this time better prepared. He left before questions could form, his horse eager beneath him, as if sensing urgency. The land shifted as he rode farther out. Open plains gave way to uneven ground, clusters of trees breaking the wind. Snow still clung to shaded places, crusted and hard. He slowed often, scanning for signs others might miss. A broken branch, scuffed patch of ground. Anything that suggested passage. He found it near midday, a faint trail nearly erased, but there. Smaller steps, careful ones, relief and worry tangled in his chest. She was alive. She was still moving, but she was tired. He followed at a distance that felt respectful, calling out only once, low and calm. Her name carried across the trees, softer than the wind. He waited. Nothing. He continued on, trusting that she would reveal herself when ready. Not far ahead, she crouched behind a fallen log, breath shallow, heart racing. She had heard him. She knew that voice now. It brought both comfort and fear. Because he had come back. Fear because his presence meant the danger was closer than she wanted to admit. She watched him through branches, noting the way he moved, careful and unarmed, except for what any man carried out here. He was not hunting her. That much she knew. Still, trust was a heavy thing to place in uncertain times. When she finally stepped into view, he stopped at once, hands open, his posture easing. The relief on his face was plain, unguarded. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said gently. She almost laughed at that, but stopped herself. "Neither should you." They stood there a moment, the space between them filled with things neither said. Finally she nodded toward a small rise nearby. "There's shelter. Not much, but it'll block the wind." They moved together then. No longer strangers, but not yet allies. The shelter was a shallow overhang of rock, dry and hidden. He set down his pack, offered food and water. She accepted without pride getting in the way this time. Hunger had a way of stripping that away. As they ate, she spoke more than she had before. Not everything, never everything, but enough. She told him of a claim made long ago, papers signed under pressure, land promised that could not be easily traced. When the claim became valuable, others came looking. She had learned to move, to stay small, to choose forgotten places. "I thought I was done running," she said quietly. That cabin was supposed to be the end. He listened, jaw tight. The land disputes, the quiet threats, the men asking questions, it all fit too neatly. "They won't stop," he said. "Not on their own." She looked at him sharply. "Then you should stay out of it." "I can't," he replied. The honesty in his voice surprised them both. They rested only briefly. He knew others were searching, and daylight was not on their side. As they prepared to move, a sound carried through the trees. Horses. More than one. They froze. The cowboy scanned the ground, mind racing. Knew these woods better than most, but not as well as he knew his own limits. He took her arm gently, guiding her deeper into cover, choosing a path that twisted and doubled back. The horses passed close enough that he could hear low voices, impatient, confident. They waited until the sound faded, both aware of how narrow the escape had been. When they moved again, the tension between them changed. This was no longer just about survival, it was about choice. By nightfall, they reached the edge of his land. Fences marked the boundary, sturdy and well kept. She stopped short of them, hesitation clear. Crossing that line meant stepping into his world, into protection she had not asked for and might not be able to leave easily. "They'll follow," she said. "Let them," he answered. "Here, they do it on my terms." They crossed together. At the ranch, he settled her into a small, unused house set apart from the main one. It was simple, but warm, stocked with food and blankets. She stood inside, taking it in, disbelief flickering across her face. "I can't stay," she said, though she did not move toward the door. "You can rest," he replied. "That's all I'm offering tonight." She slept deeply, for the first time in days. He did not. He spent the night speaking quietly with his men, setting watches, planning for what might come. Word would spread. It always did. Powerful interests did not like obstacles, and he had just made himself one. Over the next days, tension settled over the ranch like a gathering storm. Riders passed on distant roads. Questions reached town, papers were requested, old claims stirred. Gotti responded calmly with the confidence of a man who knew both the law and the land. She watched from the edges, seeing a side of him she had not expected. Not just wealth, but resolve. Not just authority, but restraint. It made her wonder what kind of life might exist beyond running, beyond hiding. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a visitor arrived. A man with polite words and sharp eyes, carrying documents that smelled of trouble. He spoke of ownership, of rights, of matters best, settled quietly. The cowboy listened, expression unreadable. When the man left, nothing was resolved, but lines had been drawn. That night, the woman stood on the porch of the small house, looking out across the land. He joined her, keeping a respectful distance. "This is getting bigger than me," she said. "It was always bigger than one person," he replied. She turned to him then, fear and hope mingling in her eyes. "If this ends badly?" "It won't," he said, though he did not yet know how. In the distance, thunder rolled, low and warning. Forces were aligning, choices narrowing. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. As darkness fell, both of them knew they were standing at the edge of something that could change everything. The final confrontation was coming, and when it did, nothing would remain the same. The storm broke before dawn, not with rain, but with movement. Riders appeared on the outer road just as the sky began to pale, their silhouettes sharp against the open land. The ranch hands were already awake, watching from fence lines and high ground. Word traveled fast across wide spaces, and by the time the riders reached the main gate, they found it closed and guarded. The wealthy cowboy stepped forward calmly, coat buttoned, hat low. He did not carry himself like a man looking for trouble, but like one ready to finish it. Behind him stood proof of his reach, men who worked his land and trusted his judgment. This was not an empty cabin on forgotten ground. This was a ranch with witnesses. The men at the gate spoke of claims and rights, of papers that had changed hands years ago. The cowboy listened without interruption. When they finished, he responded not with anger, but with clarity. He produced documents of his own, records carefully gathered over the past days, showing timelines, transfers made under pressure, and inconsistencies that would not stand in court. He spoke of the law of town officials already informed, and of the sheriff waiting nearby. The confidence in his voice shifted the balance. The men realized they were no longer chasing a lone woman living in an old cabin. They were facing a man with resources, knowledge, and a willingness to use both fairly. While the discussion continued at the gate, the woman watched from the small house, her heart pounding. She expected shouting, threats, maybe worse. Instead, she saw something she had never witnessed before. Someone standing between her and the world, not to claim her or control her, but to protect her right to stand on her own. By midday, the riders left, not in defeat, but in retreat. The matter was no longer simple, no longer hidden. It would be settled the proper way with records and truth instead of pressure and fear. The immediate danger passed like the storm clouds breaking apart overhead. In the days that followed, life slowly steadied. The sheriff confirmed what the cowboy already knew. The old claim tied to the woman had been flawed from the start. She had been misled, cornered, and pushed aside when the land suddenly became valuable. With the right support, the truth came forward. The shadow over her life began to lift. She spent time walking the ranch, still cautious, still learning to trust calm when it arrived. The wide land no longer felt like something that might swallow her whole. It felt open, honest. She helped where she could, mending fences, tending small tasks, finding purpose in simple routines. She was treated not as a burden, but as a neighbor. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the plains gold, she stood near the fence line where the cowboy joined her. Neither spoke at first. Words were not always needed. "I never thought I would stop running," she said at last. "Sometimes stopping takes more courage than leaving," he replied. She nodded, understanding that now the old cabin still stood on the edge of memory, a place that had kept her alive but never truly safe. She would return there one day, not to live but to close that chapter properly. The weeks turned into months. Legal matters resolved as expected, not quickly, but fairly. The men who had tried to force the issue moved on, drawn elsewhere where secrets were easier to hide. The land settled again, quieter this time, as if relieved. The woman chose to stay nearby on a small piece of land the cowboy helped her secure properly, with clear records and no shadows. She built slowly, carefully. This time with help she did not have to fear. The cabin she raised was modest but strong, sunlight pouring through its windows. Their lives grew closer, not through grand gestures, but through shared mornings, steady work, and conversations that stretched into the evening. The wealthy cowboy found that wealth meant something different now. Not acres or cattle, but the ability to change the course of a life by choosing to act. One afternoon, she visited the old cabin one last time. He rode with her, but waited outside while she stepped in. The space was quiet, empty, and no longer frightening.
Oh.
She ran her hand along the rough wall, remembering the nights of cold and resolve.
Oh.
Then she turned and closed the door behind her, leaving it to time. As they rode back together, she looked across the land and smiled. A smile born not of relief alone, but of hope. The kind that lasts. People in town spoke of the story for years, how a wealthy cowboy saw a woman living in an old cabin and chose not to look away, of how one decision, made on a silent, snowy day, changed more than one life. It became a reminder that strength and kindness often walk side by side, and that the land, like people, remembers who stands for what is right. When winter returned, it found her warm and settled, no longer alone. And when the cowboy looked out across his land, he no longer saw empty space. He saw a future built not just on ownership, but on trust, courage, and the quiet power of doing the right thing at the right time.